Okay, so welcome to our November Camano Wildlife Habitat Project program on the third Wednesday of the month. And we're glad you can come on this day after the dark and stormy night, and it's more peaceful today, or it's 2 days after. Yeah. Anyway, so thank you for coming, and just a little bit about our project before Montana starts and tells us about people in the parks, people and wildlife in the parks, excuse me. So we do our project so that we can have people think about their yards and what they're doing it in them. So even though development continues, we can reestablish corridors by what people do in their yards, like thinking about backyards linking up and connecting with the different parks on the island. So it's a simple way to do it in providing food, water, shelter, and places to raise young. And it's not a project that you have to do all at once. So my before picture is during the midway through our turning our grassy front yard into a total wildlife habitat. And so the left side used to be all grass, and now we've got short pines there, and so we've got the layers of trees, shrubs, and ground cover. And now we also have it on the right side now. So it's quite lush, especially in the summer when it's hot out. And the things that it's providing and what people can provide in their yard are food, water, shelter, and places to raise young. All of that can be done naturally, except for maybe water. But even the water in the leaves that sit in the leaves, like I saw a frog um, that was in a great big leaf and he had a little pool to get his water from, or logs and snags have a lot of water for insects. So there's a lot of ways that that leaving things also provides water, besides just setting up something as easy as the bottom of a pot, a flower pot pan. And so those are things to think about as far as what we can put in the yard. And then it's being a responsible gardener, especially thinking about everything that we do on the island goes into Puget Sound. And you can really tell that now as I see water gushing from the banks from the storm on Monday, and saw bulkheads actually destroyed, and part of it was the water pulling the bulkheads, and part of it was the water coming off the land, and the two things just destroyed some bulkheads. So what we do in our land can help what goes into the sound. So that can be reducing lawn, growing natives, reducing the chemicals we use in the yard, and what we do with the debris. So that can be having a pile that can be not raking up all your leaves, because your leaves are providing nutrients for your trees and providing little places for the birds and critters to dig under the leaves and get some goodies. So what we do with our debris can really be beneficial rather than just considered yard waste. And then by doing wildlife habitat, it also helps to counter the development and the habitat loss by doing things in our own yard and telling our neighbors about it so that they do things in their yards. And we actually can link up yards, like the area 1, 2, and 3 that Russell Link talks about in his Landscaping for Wildlife. Area 1's where you're up close, and that might be where you want to put a bird feeder because you want to see the birds, versus your area 2's and area 3's that are more native plants and more woodsy, and you're letting them go a little bit wilder, and they're providing the what a bird feeder would, only you don't have to clean it. You just have to actually let your plants be messy. And then of course you'd want to put some yard art so that people know that it is purposeful messiness, and it's supposed to be there. And yard signs help with our backyard wildlife habitat signs. It's easy to be a certified habitat. You can all you have to do is check off food, water, shelter, and places to raise young, and what responsible gardening techniques you're using. And it's just a couple of checkoffs in each category. And so you can see you don't have to be a pure backyard wildlife habitat from the beginning. It's a work in progress. And as you learn more and notice more of what's going on in your yard, then you just kind of become more conscientious about the things you do. Like in the summer, I stop and fill my bird bath before I continue on. And when I go to buy plants, I think of native plants or ones that are exotics that are beneficial to the wildlife and not going to be invasive or sterile. So our application is on the website, and you also can go directly to the National Wildlife Federation, and I have them at the library, both inside and outside. We have a kiosk outside and them in the library. And if you are, I know there's a bunch of people that have heard my spiel plenty of times, so now you'll be so good you can give the spiel to other people. And that's where people can find the applications. We're up to 1,008 now. I just got a new one the other day. So it's we're no longer trying to get to 1,000. Now we're trying to get to 1,100. So these are the signs you can put up in the yard. The Camano one is one we Pilar designed it using Bev Paulson's artwork, and that's $15, and I can meet you at the library, and you can have one if you're certified. Well, for $15 you can have one. And then the National Wildlife Federation has Ranger Rick on their current version of the sign, and that's $30, and you need to have your certificate number to get that. And I have the certificate numbers of people because I get my list from the National Wildlife Federation. And so we have dots all throughout the island. So the whole idea is to connect those dots and have them everywhere so that we can be an island in harmony. Excuse me, I'm trying to go too fast. An island in harmony with nature, 1 yard at a time. These are all the communities that have certified in Washington. There are 18 in Washington State. We were the second. And there are 144 in the nation, and we were the 10th. So it's an action step for communities where you can kind of counter the development, which the regulations allow, but it's devastating. So this is an action step that makes us able to think and be a part of a solution rather than sob and worry about the habitat loss. So here's where you can find information from the National Wildlife Federation or our own website. And Roxy just redesigned our website, and it's wonderful. It's just a delight. So if you haven't looked it over, it's really beautiful to look at and experience. And you can go and find our old programs on the site as well. If there's some kinds of issues or critters you want to learn about, they're listed in our program section. And these are some references for how to landscape with wildlife or live with wildlife. The two on the top are by Russell Link. He's a Department of Fish and Wildlife for the state of Washington, and he lives on Whidbey. And then the National Wildlife Federation has their own book, and that is it has more of a East Coast emphasis, and the two on the top is definitely Pacific Northwest. And so with that, here is our sign, and you can see it at the little fork in the road going east or west on Camano. And with that, I will introduce Montana. So thank you for coming tonight, and this will be a nice program to hear because it's like, we want to invite people to be in, to have wildlife habitat and to have the critters in the yards and in our parks. And it's like, okay, now that we're inviting these into our yards, or we go to the parks and that's their homes, we want to make sure that we are responsible. And so Montana will tell us about that. But let me tell you about Montana. She is a naturalist and outdoor enthusiast. For the past 6 years, she's worked in some pretty fun places in the state and national parks: Deception Pass State Park, North Cascades National Park, Wrangell St. Elias National Park. All beautiful spots. You're very lucky. And then she was a field instructor for the North Cascades Institute. She has a master's in environmental ed from Western Washington University. And she's been at Cama Beach as a interpretive specialist it'll be 2 years in January. And during the summer, she's doing daily programs. So that could be ranger talks or trips, guides, and all sorts of things. And in the winter, she's still pretty busy, and she's doing these educational programs. She's also doing some staff training for it's the Salish, what is it? This, I wrote it down. The Salish, what is it, Montana? I can't even find my notes. Salish
Salish.
Foothills
Mm-hmm.
area, and and doing educational videos. So just a wealth of information that she is providing us as listeners tonight, as well as from the parks, winter, spring, summer, and fall. So welcome, Montana Napier, and thank you for coming out on this November dark, cool night. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. All right, hopefully you can see that.
Yes, we're seeing it. Thank you.
All right, awesome. Oop, and I'm trying to, there we go. All right, so I'm Montana. That was a great introduction. Pretty much have summed it up. So I work as an interpretive specialist with Washington State Parks, and I have been in this field for about 6 years now. Absolutely love it. Best thing I could ever dream to be doing as a job and a career. And so when people hear that I work as an interpreter, they often ask me what kind of languages do I interpret? And I have to explain that it's more about interpreting the natural and cultural resources of a place so that people can develop their own special connection to that place. So resources are the tangibles. They're the things like the creeks and the trees and the animals and the historic buildings and the artifacts. And then it's important too, as an interpreter, to go beyond just conveying information and to try and reveal deeper meanings and truths, and to hopefully spark people's interest and help them get excited and want to learn more and relate it back to their lives. So that's just very briefly what I try to do as an interpreter. And I really like this quote by Freeman Tilden. People often call him the father of interpretation, and he essentially says that through interpretation comes understanding, and through understanding, appreciation, and through appreciation, protection. So the whole reason why we are trying to get people excited about these resources is with the idea that they will want to become stewards and help protect these special places as well. I'm very briefly going to talk about Washington State Parks. I'm sure all of you are familiar with Washington State Parks. I highly doubt there's anyone who has not been to one in this presentation. But a lot of people aren't aware of the mission and vision behind our parks. And so just very briefly, Washington State Parks and Recreation Commission cares for Washington's most treasured lands, waters, and historic places. State parks connect all Washingtonians to their diverse natural and cultural heritage and provide memorable recreational and educational experiences that enhance their lives. So I think some of the key words in that is that the commission cares for these different places, the lands, the water, the historic sites, and then it has this goal of connecting all Washingtonians to those places. And then the vision is that Washington State Parks will be cherished destinations with natural, cultural, recreational, artistic, and interpretive experiences that all Washingtonians will enjoy, appreciate, and proudly support. So state parks in numbers. There are currently 124 developed parks. This was, I think the article that I read, this was 2020. So if a new one popped up in the past year, I'm sorry, I didn't include it. But this protects 123,000 acres for parks and properties, 422 miles of trails, which I don't know if I believe that. I would like to think it protects more trails, just thinking about all the parks I've ever been to, but supposedly that's it. 59 miles of ocean beaches, and then in 2020, there were 37.5 million visitors statewide to our parks. So that's a lot of people. That's almost 40 million people, and each year just keeps going up. And now for Cama Beach, we had 250,000 folks. And then at Kamano, it was almost 275,000. So lots of people. Now, Salish Foothills area, I'm just gonna take a second to define what that is. So I'm based out of Cama Beach State Park on a daily basis, but I help with the education and interpretive programs at 5 different parks within the Salish Foothills area. So there's 2 on Camano Island, Cama Beach and Camano Island State Park. And then up at Padilla Bay, or Padilla, based on how you like to pronounce it, there's Bayview State Park. And then heading east on Highway 20, there's Razar, and then Rockport State Park. I'm just gonna very briefly talk about these different parks because I want to get you to start thinking about the type of habitat that they protect. So Cama Beach State Park, we have our iconic historic cabins down on the beach, overlooking the water, overlooking Saratoga Passage. In the distance, you can kind of see the Olympic Mountains. People like to come here to stay in the cabins. They like to walk the trails. We have a nice trail going to Cranberry Lake, which is kind of a marsh environment. And then Camano Island State Park, there's the beautiful forested bluff, lots of trails to explore. There's campsites that people stay at. There's a boat launch so people can go fishing and crabbing. And then Bayview State Park is a big old mud flat, but there's camping as well. And it's right on Padilla Bay, so huge intact eelgrass bed. And then Razar State Park is right on the bank of the Skagit River, kind of in the foothills of the mountains. There's big, large fields that elk like to graze in. In certain times of year, you can see salmon in the river otters, mink. And then one of my personal favorites in the whole entire state is Rockport State Park, lush old growth forests. It's right at the base of Sauk Mountain. There's creeks that drain down into the Skagit River. And we've even seen tracks of mountain lions and bears come through, like fresh tracks in the snow in the winter. So all of that to say that I believe parks aren't just a place for people, that they protect all different types of environments. There's marine parks, oceanfront, shrub steppe, mountainous, old growth forests, mud flats, marshes, and more. And I like to think of these places as these intact environments that are beneficial for wildlife. They provide a lot of the things you're talking about earlier, the food, water, shelter, places to raise young. And so when we protect this land, we're also protecting these places for the animals too. And then here's just briefly some of the critters that are commonly and not so commonly seen at Cama Beach and Camano Island State Parks. We have our gray whales and orcas that swim by in Saratoga Passage, all different types of birds, red-winged blackbirds, our resident eagles, robins, woodpeckers, harbor seals, our deer, our raccoons, Douglas squirrels, whole bunch of cottontails, and beaver. So remember I said earlier there's 37.5 million visitors in a given year at state parks. And then there's all these different types of animals that are in them as well. So since parks are a place for people to visit, there are naturally going to be conflicts. So human behavior can have both positive and negative impacts on wildlife. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about today. I'll start by talking mostly about the negative impacts, because that's where all the stories are, the stories from the field. And then the second half of the presentation, I'm going to transition into the positive ways that we can help support the wildlife at our parks and provide some tips and techniques and volunteer opportunities. So yeah, stories from the field. We're going to jump right in. Oh, but first, so I wanted to ask you all and see if you want to respond in the chat. What do you think are potential impacts from having dogs off leash? Because I would say this is probably the biggest thing we deal with on almost a daily basis when it comes to potential risks for wildlife in parks. So what do you think are potential impacts for having dogs off leash? If you want to, you can go ahead and type in the chat box and I'll see if I can read some of them. Oh. That's what, okay, let me see if I can rephrase this. What behaviors do you think dogs might do that might impact wildlife if they're free range and running around parks versus being on a leash?
Can you see the chat, Montana? Do you want us to read?
Oh, yes, I can see the chat.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I see Joan says chase wildlife away, possibly separating young wildlife from parents. Ooh, that's a good one. Actually going to talk about that. Running wild, scaring wildlife, birds, etc. Changing migration paths. Yeah, those are good ones. So some of the potential outcomes of free range dogs that I can think of is that dogs may bark, chase, or disturb wildlife, and they could potentially injure or kill wildlife. And I have two stories. As far as I know, none of them end in death. So, and have, I guess, more of a happier ending. So last winter, it was around January. I think there had been a big storm and lots of rainfall, and the creek running from Cranberry Lake down to the beach was just, it was flowing more so than usual. And there was a beaver that got washed down the creek and probably ended up where it didn't want to be. And there was an owner and a dog on the beach running around off leash. And from people's report, the dog caught the scent of the beaver and ran to the creek and started harassing the beaver, was barking at it. The beaver was tucked under some logs. So we don't believe it got injured. We didn't see any injury, but of course, it wasn't a great situation for the beaver to be in. And we ended up, the park, we called someone who used to specialize in wildlife rehabilitation, and they came out and they took a look at the beaver and said that it was showing a lot of stress symptoms, and it was trying to conserve its energy, and it was really cold. And so we were going to keep an eye on it, and if it hadn't moved by the next morning, we were going to try to relocate the beaver back up to the lake. So the happy ending to that one is that the next morning the beaver was gone. So we assumed that it was able to get back to where it needed to go. And then the other one that happened pretty recently this summer was that not even in the park, but further down the beach, about a mile, there was an owner who let their dogs out to go to the bathroom, and the dogs caught a scent of deer and they ran into another lot, and there was a doe and a fawn, and separated the fawn and then chased the fawn down the beach, and the fawn ended up at Cama Beach State Park on the beach. And so that's what this picture is of this fawn who was doing what it knew best. It hunkered down, it was super still, tried to blend in, that people were walking by, some people would see it and they'd want to come closer. And I was sitting out for a couple of hours trying to keep people moving and pass by, like we're not going to get close and affect its scent or scare it more. But eventually, so this was during one of those heat wave moments. So it was really hot on the beach, and the little bit of shade that you see in this picture was gone. So it just was baking, and I called Fish and Wildlife, and they suggested to either let nature take its course or to try and herd the fawn back towards where it came from. So that's what I did. I walked the mile down the beach, kind of shooing it back towards where it came from. And as soon as we got to the lot, just before the one where it had been separated from its mother, it went up the stairs and it went into the yard and it laid down under a tree and it stayed there. And I talked to the owners or the people who lived there, and they're like, yeah, we're gonna watch it from afar, but this is a good spot. Like, this is close to where it came from, and hopefully the doe will find it. So that's 2 instances. People oftentimes, they don't think about their dog doing something like that, but wildlife, they can be anywhere. Like, this is their home, and I doubt the owners of either of those dogs that day expected the type of behavior that their dog did. So then another thing is that dogs can leave behind a scent. So if a dog runs off trail, they can spread their scent and affect how wild animals behave in that area. And then they can have an impact on other people's experience. And I don't need to go too in depth in that, but let's say you're a birder and you are watching this beautiful moment happening real time, and a dog off leash runs up and starts barking and the birds disperse. It's impacted both visitor experiences and the behavior of the wildlife. So that dogs off leash, this is the big one. This is the daily head against the wall thing that I would say park staff see that's happening. And then finally with dogs, there is no poop fairy. You might have seen these signs that are in our parks, and it's just encouraging people to clean up after their dog, because dog waste does have a lot of impact. Everything washes away and concentrates, and yes, I feel like there could be a whole talk in itself about dog poop. Then moving on to some of the other negative type of impacts that humans can have on wildlife in parks is, unfortunately, fatalities with vehicle collision. And that's why it's really important to go the posted speed limit and watch for wildlife in our parks while you drive, because you kind of have to think of them as big asphalt rivers that are cutting through their habitat. And so I love this picture. It's of a doe and 2 fawns. They're crossing the street at the crosswalk, and then you can see the speed limit is flashing because there was a car approaching. That's what the 2 little ones are looking at. So super important to be cautious when you're driving through parks. I swear in the summer, I have to stop or alter what I'm doing when I'm driving at least once a week, just from deer alone. And then, of course, feeding wildlife is a no-no. So this is a sequence of photos. They're screenshots that I took from a video. My first week working at Cama Beach, I was walking on the bluff trail, and I saw a whole bunch of chickadees just flitting about through the bushes. And I thought, oh, they're so cute. Let me get out my phone and record a video. And you can see in the first photo, the bird is looking down and away. The second one, it sees me and it looks up. And then in the third one is of the bird. It landed on top of my phone, and it's me tossing my phone aside. So the birds, there was someone who was coming to the park and was feeding the birds. They were leaving bird seed and peanuts on top of stumps and then actually hand feeding them. And so these birds were habituated and saw humans now as a food source, and were bold enough to land on a phone in my hands. So there are potential negative outcomes from feeding wildlife. And one is that human food a lot of times is not healthy for wild animals. We don't need to be feeding, Douglas squirrels Cheetos. That's not their natural diet. And then it also teaches animals to beg rather than finding their natural food sources. It increases their contact with humans, which can result in dangerous events. So if you're at like a national park, it can end up with bear encounters, harmful events, so like a chipmunk biting someone's finger, or fatal events, like at Mount Rainier, they have issues with habituated foxes getting hit by cars. And then finally, if food is brought back to the den, the food could spoil and ruin the rest of that animal's food stash. And then this is the last negative focus, I swear. It's the idea of not touching the wildlife. And a big one are harbor seal pups. Almost every summer, there ends up being a harbor seal pup on the beach, whether it's at Cama Beach or Camano. And that's a very natural behavior for the mom to kind of leave it on the beach while she goes and continues to feed and then come back and retrieve it. But when people want to get close and take selfies, or some are bold enough, they want to try and touch it, it affects the scent of the animal. It causes stress to the animal. It's disturbing the mom being able to come back and get the animal. And so unfortunately, we have a new addition to our taxidermy here at the park. This was a seal pup that was over at Camano Island State Park, I think in 2019. That did not make it. It was also born premature. So the added stress of people coming by and everything else that went on led to it now becoming an educational tool to talk to people about hopefully staying back 100 yards if possible and leaving these creatures alone. So other behaviors that negatively impact wildlife are things like dumping trash at a trailhead, accidentally leaving behind micro trash, trying to get close for a photo, leaving food scraps out at a campsite, trampling vegetation, etc., noisy groups. So I'm going to ask another question. I'm going to ask, what do you think you can do to have a positive impact on wildlife in parks? So I'll bring up chat again and see what people have to say. So what do you think we can all do to have positive impact on wildlife in the parks? All right, I'll give a few more seconds just in case someone is typing. Oh, I see. Do you think surveys, birds, sea star, etc., are positive or negative? I personally see them as positive because it's helping. Oh, scrolled away. Okay, I see some comments coming in. So tread and speak softly. Keep my impact minimal, quiet, watch, don't touch, enjoy through binoculars. Binoculars are a good one because then you keep that distance, but yet you still get to see the animal close up and their environment. Walk quietly, stay on trails, keep your food in your bag, keep our voices down while on trails, and then don't interfere, just watch and enjoy. Those are all great suggestions. All right, so here's some of the things that we actively do as park staff and volunteers to encourage positive behavior while people explore the intertidal zone. So just for some context, these are some of the critters that we see over at Cama Beach State Park, and I'm sure Camano as well, but that's Cama Beach is where I took these photos during our summer low tide walks. So giant pink sea stars, the Pycnopodia, the sunflower sea star, barnacles, sand dollars, aggregating anemones, moon snails, and their egg casings. And then in the far left corner, there is a little red rock crab that's hiding in the eelgrass. So these are some of the animals that we can actively see at low tide and appreciate. And so what us park staff and educational volunteers we try to do is provide a safety and etiquette message to everyone that's exploring the tide pools, whether it's one big presentation at the beginning or we go around and we interact with these individual groups. So number one, it's always important to protect yourself and wear proper shoes. And then number two, leave living animals where you find them on the beach, reminding people that this is their home, so we want to have minimal disturbance. 3, overturn rocks carefully, putting them back gently the way you found them, that they provide home and hiding places for many animals. And then watch where you walk and walk with care. That's a big one. We are giants compared to most of these animals. So we don't want to accidentally injure or crush them. And then leaving animals attached to rocks, never trying to scrape them or break tube feet. Removing them may kill them. And then leaving the beach as undisturbed as possible. And I really do think it makes a difference having people down on the beach actively interacting with visitors, because a lot of people, they don't know what they're looking at, and they don't know what that animal needs to survive. And people have a lot of misconceptions too from things like cartoons. Like there was a time this last summer where I saw a parent and their child literally walking the beach and just picking up sea stars and tossing them back in because they thought that they were going to die during low tide. So yeah, just spreading educational messages. Then something we can all do is practice leave no trace. Leave no trace is something that is usually focused on in like backcountry travel and trips. There are typically 7 principles, but I think ones that apply even to state parks, of course, are camping on durable surfaces, traveling on durable surfaces, staying on trail, packing out your trash, disposing of waste properly. We can again think about it with like pet waste. Leave what you find, so leaving the rocks, the plants, natural objects as you find them, minimizing fire impacts and respecting wildlife, and storing food properly, like at a campsite, or if you're out and you put your backpack down, making sure that it zipped up and your eyes are on it, because chipmunks have been known to climb into people's open backpacks and find food. So respecting wildlife. Someone already mentioned looking at them through binoculars, this idea of maintaining a distance, never feeding them, protecting them from our food, storing that and our trash securely, controlling our pets at all times, and then, of course, avoiding wildlife during sensitive times, such as mating, nesting, raising young, or winter. And then another thing that we can all do is volunteer. And there's lots of opportunities here on the island to volunteer and get involved and try and have educational contacts with people, participating in stewardship efforts and citizen science projects. So I'm going to talk about 5 different potential opportunities that if you're interested, you could become a part of and start helping with parks and spreading the word. So number 1, you can become a soundwater steward. So that's something that I officially have become a part of this year. I went through the spring and fall training, and they focus on the 3 things that I just mentioned: the education, like general public education, stewardship, and citizen science. So education, people sometimes at Cama Beach will set up a table, an informational table, with different fun objects that people can check out and learn about different topics like marine animals, and I think one of them is actually dog poop. And then there's also citizen science projects. So there's intertidal monitoring and like marine bird surveys, and then stewardship projects like trail cleanup and beach cleanups. And then another route is through the Cama Beach Foundation. And so this is a picture of one of our volunteers with the discovery wagon. So we have lots of animal pelts and specimens that represent the different animals that are in these two parks, Cama Beach and Camano, that we set out and just talk to people as they walk by and share some fun facts and information and try to get them excited and thinking about how these parks are their home. And then Who Eats with Their Feet program, that's where there's a tank and you go and you collect barnacles and you put it in and have a microscope on it, and people learn for the first time, I kid you not, that barnacles are animals, that they're real. They're not just a rock, and they get to see them come out and feed on the plankton. And it blows many people's minds, but that's something that we also have volunteers, staff, and then Bubbles, that's not relevant to this, but low tide beach walks, where you actually go out and can be a contact for people who have questions, and also go out and find the cool things to share with others. We have hula hoops that we walk the beach and we place the hula hoops around fun critters for people to come and check out. And then it also kind of creates a natural barrier too. It's like, oh, like we can look in the hula hoop, but we won't always necessarily touch, like especially with the sunflower sea stars, we do not touch those. They're recovering. I think we saw 6 of them one day this summer, and that was very exciting to see them coming back from the sea star wasting disease. Another thing, I love working with locals who like to give a presentation on a topic that they're passionate about. I saw that Pat Holmes did one of these presentations recently. She's great. People love her Eagle talks at our parks. Here she is giving a presentation. I think this was early September, and she kind of gave us her yearly update on what the local Eagles have been up to, and shared with everyone the family tree that she's been keeping track of and taking photos of over the years. So I love working with people who want to come out and give a presentation. And we also have an opportunity, I guess locals can participate too, but we do have a volunteer cabin that people are allowed to stay in for a night in exchange for their time and knowledge. So Camano Island Amphitheater, I'm always looking for speakers in the summertime. And then we do have a summer volunteer naturalist position. These are typically people who are, I think, a couple years into college or recent graduates. So this was our summer volunteer naturalist this year. Anna, she was an Evergreen student and studying, I believe it was marine science. She loved the water. And so here she is doing a marine mammal table and sharing with kids about some of the different creatures that are out in the sea. So that's something we have on the Cama Beach Foundation website. So if you know of anyone who is interested in applying, I believe we will have that posted probably in January, and we'll be doing interviews in March. And then there is the Marine Mammal Stranding Network. Now, they do have a phone number on their website. I called that this summer when there was some odd orca behavior on the water. And the person who picked up said that that number was no longer valid. So I went ahead and put up the Orca Network contact information. Either way, they will connect you with the people you need to speak to. It's a good number to call if you see a stranded marine mammal. Or if you see something like a seal pup on the beach. They're always looking for volunteers for physical activities ranging from babysitting. seal pups on the beach to make sure people don't get too close, to collecting specimens, to rearticulating skeletons, and participating in necropsies like gray whales and things. So now that I talked about 5 of the volunteer opportunities that you can look into if you're interested, I want to share this technique that you might not have heard of before that I found really useful. It's something you can use as a volunteer or as a visitor yourself, and it's called authority of the resource technique. So let's say you see someone doing some of the negative behaviors I talked about earlier in the presentation. This is a positive way that you can potentially chat with them and help educate them about the negative impact that that's having. But a disclaimer, oh no, I'm gonna go to the disclaimer first and then go back. It is not our job to enforce rules, regulations, and laws. That's not what I am encouraging you to do here. As a visitor and a volunteer, it's our role to educate and inform, such as informing someone the requirement to keep pets on a leash, not saying like you're going to get a citation. If anyone ever sees something that is a violation, illegal activity, or an emergency, always call 911 or contact park ranger or staff. So that's kind of the disclaimer. I'm going to talk a bit about this technique, but I don't want anyone to feel like I'm saying you should be doing this, because that's not the case. There's a time and a place, and you get to decide whether or not you want to try art. So what is art? What is the authority of the resource? It's developed by Dr. George N. Wallace, and it's a technique to help a person confront and influence people that are doing something that damages the environment. So according to Webster's dictionary, authority means the power to influence or command thought, opinion, or behavior. So art is about using education and the authority of the natural resources to explain why an action is harmful versus the authority of an agency. So let's say you see someone feeding wildlife, you will be talking to that person about how feeding wildlife is harmful, rather than saying you'll get fined if you do X. So it's relying on those natural resources to provide an explanation versus rules and regulations. So I hope that makes sense. So these are kind of the 5 basic steps to have like an art encounter. So number 1, and don't worry, I'm going to walk us through a couple scenarios. So hopefully you'll get a better idea of what exactly I'm talking about. But number 1 is you always give someone the benefit of the doubt. If you decide that you want to approach someone about something that they're doing that's less than leave no trace, you want to make sure that you're approaching them with this openness, and you're not going into it ready to be accusatory. So you start by giving them the benefit of the doubt. It could be a mistake that they made. They could honestly have no clue. You don't know what someone's intention is. Number 2, you focus on building rapport with 3 Ps apparently. Rapport with the person you're approaching. So like, hey, how's it going? Have you been enjoying your hike? You start with an icebreaker and you get to know them on a person-to-person level. Number 3, something that people don't think about too often, is you want to try and stand side by side with someone and not eye to eye. When you're eye to eye, that can be seen as confrontational. When you're standing side by side, it creates this opportunity where you both can look at something in the environment and focus on that versus creating a power dynamic between you. And then 4, it's always an educational message. That's the whole point of approaching the person to begin with. It's not to shame them or even to correct their behavior, because at the end of the day, they're a person with their own autonomy. It's about providing that education. And then 5 is offering up an alternative. And so I'll give you an example of that. But if you want to learn more, because I know I just went through this really quickly, there's great resources online. Leave No Trace, they have a bunch of videos and articles talking specifically about the authority of the resource technique. And then there's also the essay that Dr. George Wallace wrote that kind of inspired the phrasing, authority of the resource. And then, of course, different volunteer programs usually have formal trainings that teach you a lot of these things. So let's start. We're going to go deep into a scenario, and then I'm going to do 2 scenarios where I'm going to ask you how you think you would approach it based on what we've learned. So scenario number 1, we see someone's dog running off leash on a trail. So as we're hiking up to Cranberry Lake, we see a group ahead of us with the dog running off leash. So what do we want to say when we have art in mind? All right, I need to move something around my screen. Okay, now I can read it. So option A, hey there, how are you doing today? Are you having a good hike? Or option B, hey there, I just want to let you know that dogs aren't allowed off leash. I don't want you to get in trouble. So if we're doing art, we're actually going to go with option A, because we're just going to purely start with an icebreaker and get to know those people, and even see if they're going to be receptive to anything we have to say. So we choose option A, and the owner responds with, hi, we're doing pretty well. This trail is so peaceful and the forest is beautiful. How do we now bring up their dog being off leash? Option A, yeah, this is one of my favorite places to walk. I love getting to the lake and listening to the different birds, but I've noticed many dogs off leash today. Or option B, it is a peaceful trail. I see your dog here. Do you know dogs aren't allowed off leash, right? So option A, there's a line at the end of it, but I've noticed many dogs off leash today. Having an objective message is something that art encourages. So even though this sounds very passive aggressive, I've noticed many dogs off leash today. It is going to be probably the least confrontational out of the 2. Because for all you know, maybe that dog doesn't even belong to that group. That dog could be far away from its owner. But if we immediately went to saying like, I see your dog right here, that could automatically make people start to shut down. So it sounds passive aggressive, but actually option A, but I've noticed many dogs off leash today. So we say that, and the owner responds with, what's wrong with dogs off leash? Buttercup loves to hike, and the park is an awesome place for her to burn off energy. How do you inform them dogs are not allowed off leash? We'd say, A, that's really nice to hear, but dogs aren't allowed off leash in the park. Or B, I understand. My Theo is the same, but this area is teeming with wildlife, including beavers and migratory birds. When dogs run off leash, they can scare these birds away from their food, water, and the rest they need. And there have been issues at Cama Beach in the past where a dog off leash even approached a beaver. So, of course, we're going to go with the more long-winded B. We're providing a little bit more of an educational message. We're trying to help them understand the reasoning behind why this rule exists, and hopefully getting them to start to care about some of these things that we've mentioned. So option B, it leads us to owner saying, oh really? Well, Buttercup is well behaved and would never bite or chase after a wild animal. Are we going to respond with, really? Can you read your dog's mind? No, that would be escalating the situation and making this confrontational. Instead, it would be positive to say something like, it's hard to predict what dogs will do in those situations. I would feel a lot better if everyone kept their dogs on leash in the park, especially for the sake of wildlife. There's actually a great park where dogs are allowed to run off leash just a few minutes from here if you're interested. So option B does 2 things. The first thing it does, it delivers an I message. So sometimes an I message can be effective. If you say how it makes you feel or your perspective, but you're very straightforward about it, that can actually be a good thing. It can help make it more relatable. Sometimes not so much, but that's one of those things you should dive into on the art website and resources. They talk about that, where sometimes iMessages are actually really effective And then the second thing option B does is that it provides that alternative that we talked about. It provides maybe a potential solution to the problem that they're facing, where they want Buttercup to get their energy out before they go home. So then finally, how we're going to wrap it up, the owner says, I see, what's the name of the park? And sure, I can keep Buttercup on a leash for now. How do you end this interaction? You'd say, A, thanks, that would be great. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and get to see some cool things on your hike. Or B, thanks, make sure you remember this for the next time you visit. We're gonna go with A. So again, it's that idea, you always give someone the benefit of the doubt, you always assume the best intentions, and you try to relay an educational message. It's not your job to make them actively change their behavior, but hopefully you can help change their mindset. So it's that idea of influencing them using the authority of the resource. So now, let's see if I can still see it. I'm going to provide those two scenarios, and I'm just going to open it up to you in the chat section where you can type what you think you might say or try, or how you might try to approach someone about this issue if you were trying to use art. So I can't, for some reason, it's not showing me the bottom of my screen, so I can't read the scenario.
You witnessed someone litter on trail? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, I can't read that. It's
okay.
Covered up.
You witnessed someone litter on the trail.
Oh, there you go. Simple. So that's the scenario. So what would you say with art in mind? And feel free to go ahead and type it into the chat box. I guess I just want to preface, you do not need to go nearly as in depth as the scenario that I just did. You can start by saying, what's one thing that you might try and say to someone, like, what's a reason of why litter is bad or could have a negative impact? If you see someone litter on the trail, I just pick it up. Yep, I do that as well. It looks like you've had a great snack. Think of the animals when try to eat this. Think of the animals who, when, think of the animals.
Maybe who will try
Oh,
to.
who will. That makes sense. Pardon me, I'm sure you didn't mean to drop this litter in this amazing park. Yeah, will. Yeah, so those are two good ones. Let's see. Okay, so here's some of the ideas that I had for what you could say. I would always start it off with, hi there, how's it going? Are you enjoying your hike today? So you'd be surprised, as soon as you just ask people how their hike is going, oftentimes people will start to share all the cool things they have seen or experienced, and you start having that person-to-person connection right away. People usually love talking about what they're experiencing in nature. And then use that as a transition into, I noticed some dropped trash back there on the trail. We try to keep this park free of trash to protect the animals, the water, and plants. Plus, it looks a lot nicer. I picked it up, but do you mind picking up any that you see for me? So I saw in the comment that someone said they usually just pick it up. I do that as well. But then providing that opportunity of hopefully maybe they'll pick up the stuff that they see then down the trail, or they will be more conscious and not litter. So this interaction allows the visitor to realize their own mistake. Who knows, maybe they had accidentally dropped it. Moving forward, hopefully they'll help keep the trails litter free. So again, it's assuming the best. Then the last scenario we're going to talk about is you see someone actively feeding wildlife. What are some of the things that you might say if you're trying to approach this from an art direction? And again, you can go ahead and type in the chat box. Because I have to say, a lot of times people don't realize that feeding wildlife is bad. They think, oh, this is a cute little squirrel and I'm feeding it, like I'm helping it for the day. I'm helping it like I help my pet. They don't realize that it can affect their behavior and have these negative impacts. All right, so here's a suggestion. Empathize with their love of chipmunks, birds, etc. to start with. Yes, I think that's a really good approach. Connecting with them and connecting that back to the resource, about the resource. Okay, let's see. OMG, I'm so happy that I've never seen that. I have no idea what I would say. That's fair. I guess you haven't ever spent time at like a national park on a highly trafficked trail. I swear. So I've volunteered a couple months one summer at Mount Rainier as a meadow rover, and the amount of times I had to educate people on why feeding the marmots and the chipmunks and the ground squirrels, why that's a bad idea. That was like an hourly basis. And they oftentimes they don't realize that it's bad. Okay, and then the other suggestion, it's so kind of you to provide food. It doesn't always sit well with animals as they have different digestive systems. So I like that approach of saying like that is like the person probably does think that they are being kind and that they're helping that critter. So trying to connect to them through that. Nice. All right, let's see what I have. So here's that objective statement again versus like, I see you feeding the squirrels. Something like, I've noticed a lot of squirrels approaching humans in this area. So just having that statement and then transitioning into, let's see, get this out of the way. Feeding wildlife sends the message that humans are a quick food source. It attracts wildlife closer to humans where they can become aggressive or seek us out for food. This hurts their health and they can put their safety at risk by changing their normal behaviors to come closer to us. Wildlife that becomes dependent on humans for food can starve. So that's the long-winded answer. I'd probably also include a story that would demonstrate how it can be harmful to these animals. If I was short on time, I'd probably approach it more from the direction of, I'd feel a lot better if we kept wildlife wild and ignore them or shoo them when they approach. This helps them have a safe fear of humans. And then I can't read the bottom of my screen again for some reason.
And not learn that we have food and beg.
Yes, exactly. And land on our phones. And then here's some last tips about art. It's using that passive, non-blaming voice when describing undesirable behaviors. And that's something I catch myself. It's not good to say bad and good, but it's hard to train yourself out of that. But desirable, undesirable, positive, negative, I would say is good language to use. And then of course, modeling those desired practices and behaviors. If you're feeding a chipmunk or you're getting really, really close to an animal, so you can take a photo and then you turn around and talk to someone about why they shouldn't be doing that, like your message is not going to come across. You're being contradictory. Using appropriate non-judgmental body language. So having open body language, standing side to side, like we talked about, so that it's not as confrontational. And then focusing on, and you can touch, handle, or examine things in nature. So this is a picture of two guys doing art. And you notice they're standing side to side, and the person talking has turned the other person's direction on something in the environment. So focusing their attention on that, it takes that pressure off of them and what they might have been doing. And it helps you connect over what you're seeing together. And then refer to the norms shared by other users. So talking about, those more desirable behaviors, and then using I messages if appropriate. So including how you feel or your observations, maybe some personal stories of what you've seen happen when XYZ behavior was occurring. And then I would say a big one is not putting group leaders or parents on the spot in front of their group or children. That usually that doesn't go well because it creates this weird dynamic, and people don't like to be told they're wrong in front of the people around them. So if there's a situation, like if I see something happening at Cama Beach, usually I will try to pull a group leader or a parent aside and talk to them rather than just walking up and lecturing the whole group and making that person feel bad. And then finally, I already said this before, but call 911 or contact park staff if you see something that's illegal or just even a situation that you don't have the capacity to deal with. That is always encouraged. Like, you get to decide how much you want to engage. It's up to you. And then finally, final thoughts. It can be easy to get bogged down in some of the negatives when you think about, like I said, the 37.5 million visitors. Everyone has their own perspective, their own thought processes, their own knowledge base. And there's a lot of people coming to these places and doing their own thing. So it's easy to get bogged down by the problems. But all of the problems that we talked about today, they were created by humans, and I think they can easily be fixed by humans. And I think education plays a big role in that. And so if we're going to coexist with wildlife in parks, then we need to learn how to be respectful of their homes, because again, it's the place where they get their food, their water, their shelter, and the places to raise their young. Like, we are visiting their homes. And that is it. That is what I have for you as this presentation. So I guess now is probably the portion where we go into questions.
Yeah, that'd be great. You can unmute yourself if you want to ask a question, or you can put something in the chat. Make sure I do that. And we'll
like to speak to me.
So feel free to ask questions. So I think this is really marvelous because on Camano, it's not just the parks where we interact with wildlife. Many people have 5-acre properties or even larger, and all of us have access to more wildlife than we would in a city. So all of these things can be applied in our own backyards. And with our neighbors, I'm planning to use some of these techniques with my neighbors.
Nice, that's good to hear. Yeah, and I encourage people to look at the Leave No Trace website and the authority of the resource. I really do like their videos. They explain it nicely.
Montana, if you'll send me that slide, I'll put it up on our website, and I'll include it in email that goes out to afterwards to people who've registered. Maybe they don't have electricity on tonight, but they'll be watching this or looking at it later, so they'll be able to get the benefit of all of those marvelous pieces of advice, because it's hard to confront people It's very difficult, and it seems like a much better approach than what I've tried in the past. Any other thoughts or questions? I'm seeing things in the chat. That was great. Really opened my eyes on how to approach people. Thank you. This was an incredible presentation. Montana, you're so awesome. We love you here.
Thank you.
Val, do you have any other comments or other?
Well, just thank you for that perspective, because it's like I always, being a teacher, I'm used to telling people what to do, and expect them to behave, and so so this is nice to think about, especially when people can flare up pretty easily these days. So this is a real thoughtful way to do things that I should have thought of myself. But so I appreciate this perspective on things. And I also would like to add about Friends of Camano Island Parks as a place to volunteer. They sponsor our project, our Camano Wildlife Habitat project. So and they do a lot of things for the parks, and they're the reason we have a lot of the parks on the island. So that's another cool volunteer group on the island.
Darn, I can't believe I missed them. FOSIP, no.
Montana, how do we contact park staff?
I would say the easiest way is always through the Welcome Center for both Cama Beach and Camano. Because the folks who work there, they're super helpful. They're well connected. They can give you the email of who you need to be talking to about whatever. Yeah, and they usually know what's going on in both parks as well.
What about other parks, other state parks?
Yeah, other state parks is kind of park to park.
Okay, so it depends. There's no one good way.
I do believe there's avenues of like contacting regional staff, and they can redirect people.
Okay.
It's always just a process of you reach out to someone and they're going to try to find who you should actually be talking to.
Okay. And Susan says, this was an incredible presentation. I will make my future visits about the surroundings, not what I will bring me enjoyment, maybe what I would bring me enjoyment. Thank you, Montana and Val, for being with us tonight. It's hard to type when you're under pressure and you want to get it out. And we know that my typing is terrible, and it's just, you need to get it out. So any other comments or questions about park activities? Or I'm looking forward to Winterfest. I called it Harvest Fest, but yeah, Winterfest is what's coming up. Harvest Fest was what was in October.
Yes.
So I know you've had some really fabulous Winterfests before. I always look forward to them. And what happens in January then?
Yeah, in January, we're going to have our 2 first day hikes on January 1st.
Okay.
And I think it might be 10 to noon is the one scheduled for Cama Beach. And then the one for Camano Island State Park will be, maybe it's like 1 to 3.
Okay.
So if there are people who want to go to both, they can, or they can pick and choose.
So we go to the park website to just find that out, or the Crab Cracker or Cama Beach Foundation. What's the best?
Yeah, so it will ideally be in the Crab Cracker, on the Cama Beach Foundation calendar. They typically keep things updated, and we try to keep our Cama Beach State Park calendar updated as well.
Okay. Are there going to be any star watching? I don't know if they're still doing the stargazing activities. Did that get shut down with COVID?
In the winter?
Yeah. Or is it mainly a summer thing? Probably a summer thing, isn't it?
I have to be honest, I started working at Cama Beach mid-January of 2020. So
wow. Okay.
Things got pretty funny pretty quick.
Yeah. We were just talking about the star event, the meteor shower. So I was wondering if they still had their telescope out. Okay, great. Well, thank you. Does anybody else? Oh, here's can you tell us the address of Cama Beach State Park calendar calendar of activities? So I think we just
Yeah.
talked about that.
Let me see if I can find it and paste it in real quick. Okay, I don't know if it's been updated recently, but definitely in the summer, Susie, the foundation president, she keeps it updated.
Yeah, Susie does a great job with that.
Mhm.
Okay, there it's in the chat, and I'll put that in on the website too for our post follow-up. Any other comments, or Joan, do you want to add anything? All right, well, thank you all very much. Have a good winter. And we do not have a backyard wildlife habitat program in December because we joined FOSUP for their potluck and silent auction. So that's always a fun event. And hopefully we'll see you in January. We're thinking about what programs to present next year. So let us know if you have questions that you'd like us to address, or topics, or speakers. That would be wonderful if you'd suggest speakers. So have a good evening, and we will see you again next year. Thank you, Montana. That was really fun. You make things really fun for us, and we really appreciate it. Val, final words?
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks a lot, Montana, because it is, we want to kind of attract the wildlife to our yards, and the people aspect and the people responsibility is important in the parks as well as in our yards. So I think that's a good reminder, as well as how to work with people. So thank you. This is a good program. Much appreciated. And thank you all for coming as well.
Thank
everybody.
you. Good night.
Good night.